It's story time with the Histories. With your host, Matt.
Some podcasts try to seize upon like having a big guest. Like if you have somebody who's, popular in some sort of creator space, you have that person on, you try to build up some momentum, but that's not our style.
No, not
No,
at all.
we had Heimler on, sure. And, I don't know if you saw this, but he just surpassed 1 million subs on his YouTube channel.
Nice.
Yeah, Heimler's
Nice.
History popping off. We're not paid or sponsored by Heimler's History. We're just going to throw a little love to a very successful colleague, vastly more successful than us.
Oh, completely, yeah.
But, back to us, we did that crossover episode to close out our last season. And then we immediately went on a 1-year hiatus.
I know. We're so
Recorded
bad.
nothing. But you know what? We're back.
We are back.
And we're in this for the love of the game. It doesn't matter that we went on a 1-year hiatus. I
I
don't
just
care.
like to think of it more as like a creativity process that
Yeah.
until we truly are inspired, we don't want to put out a lesser product.
That's what happened, right? But you know what, history nerds out there, listener, we're back. Season 4. Let's go.
Welcome to Storytime with the Historists, the podcast where we take the plunge into the weird and wonderful waters of history. We're your hosts, Jen Dumas and Matt Breen, teachers, part-time historians, and full-time sarcasm enthusiasts. In our series, we dig into the drama of collapsed empires, bring wild rebellions back to life, and explore the jaw-dropping moments in history that'll leave you saying, seriously, that happened? See, the truth is, history isn't just timelines and conflicts. It's full of quirky, clever, and downright wild people, kind of like us. And today we're traveling back to 1692 to a small Puritan village in colonial Massachusetts, where fear, faith, and fractured communities sparked one of the most infamous events in American history, the Salem Witch Trials.
But this was a long time coming. I think this is right back to the beginning, right back to the very first ever Mongol cast. I think we've had students clamoring that we do this one. So it's fun to finally get to it.
Well, it's just kind of like our MO. It just takes us forever to get anything done.
Yeah. All right. So before we hop into this, what did we consult? What are our sources here?
So we have a variety of sources, probably one of the most important of which was this amazing book called In the Devil's Snare, The Salem Witchcraft Crisis of 1692 by Mary Beth Norton. One of the most meticulously researched books I have ever read, and really probably the biggest basis for this podcast. But the other sources we've used, you guys can find in the transcript.
All right, here we go.
All right, so I have a question for you before we start all of this. So you're a
Shoot.
parent, as am I. Have your kids ever done something or said something that like literally stopped you in your tracks and made you think, where the hell did that even come from?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. They do that, incessantly, it seems.
Dude, as I was doing the research for this podcast, I was just remembering back. And my son would have been like 4 or 5 years old at the time, and I'm getting him ready for bed. And he informed me that a person named Caden came to visit him at night. And
Creepy.
apparently, Caden wore a white suit and had black eyes. And even though Ethan kept saying, but he was so nice to talk to, Mom, I had 2 thoughts going through my head. The first one was, WTF? The second
totally.
was, how soon can I schedule an exorcism for this house?
Dude,
oh my
got
God,
to,
seriously,
yeah.
white suit, black eyes?
Dude, that's creepy. That's
I
like
know.
that's kind of like a southern Slenderman.
Oh my God. I was just like, I couldn't sleep. I'm like, oh my God, we have a ghost in our house and apparently it's targeting my child.
Ooh, that's creepy.
I know, so weird. You kids ever done something like that? Like talked about a ghost?
Not really. We haven't had anything like that, but I am familiar with like this phenomena of like nighttime visualizations, especially for people who experience sleep paralysis, who, wake up and they're just like kind of feeling like glued to the bed and they can't control their bodies or move anything. And oftentimes, they report seeing an entity, a large man at the end of their bed. It's the man in the hat. Sometimes his face is blurred out and blacked out. This large sort of spectral being. So while I've never had my kids creep me out or I've never experienced it, I do know that this is a pretty common internet phenomena.
Interesting. I didn't know about the man in the hat. Like that's
Yeah.
what they saw at the end of the bed. That's not okay in so many different ways. Just not. But I was thinking about it. It's like when Ethan told me this, my first response wasn't, oh my God, we have, it's horrible. And I didn't believe him or anything. Maybe for a split second I did, but after my rational brain took over, I was fine. But I kind of equated it back to 1692 and this idea that here we have 3 young girls, young girls,
Mhm.
right? Who out of the blue sit there and start talking about the specters that have visited them and the demons. And it got me wondering, why as adults, would your first response be to believe these kids?
I think it's gotta be, a sign of the times in a lot of ways, really and
True.
truly. Yeah. So let's get into the context of this because I do think that in the time and place, it does make sense, right?
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, the Salem Witch Trials ran from 1692 to 1693, Massachusetts colony in New England, the Pacific Northeast, like modern day Massachusetts,
Yeah.
Maine, etc. During this time frame, many hundreds of people really were accused. 150 to 200 people were in prison. 14 women were hanged. One man was hanged, and one man died of a torture, like a pressing. We'll get
Yeah.
into that later. And 5 others just died in prison from prison fever, which, like, for the listener, anytime anybody gets some kind of fever in history before the 20th century,
You
it is assuredly diarrhea.
yeah.
It's a diarrhea-based, yeah, something. So anyway, all of this stemmed from the testimony initially of 3 young girls, Betty Paris, age 9, Abigail Williams, age 11, and Ann Putnam Jr., age 11. These would be the girls that you were just raging on.
Yeah, so let me and here's where the rage comes from is as I was doing all this research and reading all of this, I just was like, how I don't believe any of this that their visions were true. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, as you see people getting imprisoned, how can you continue this as a young child? You see people getting imprisoned. People get executed. And your response isn't to go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was so wrong. Your response was to up the ante. Like it
Yeah, but
threw me.
yeah, totally. I think what we should keep in mind throughout all of this is that witch hunting and witch trials had been a huge element of European society. And what we have here are
Right.
these transplants who have escaped religious tension and warfare in Europe during the middle section of the 17th century, the
Uh-huh.
1600s. And, for more on that, go check out our Thanksgiving episode. Charlie Brown was full of
Totally
crap,
true.
where we talked all about the foundation of the Plymouth colony and all that sort of stuff. You can get a little bit deeper dive into that. Anyway, because of the Protestant Reformation and the conflicts that arose out of that, witch hunting had become a way of score settling, of identifying outsiders and ostracizing those who were different than you, and in a lot of ways also served as a form of entertainment. While witch hunting had really fallen out of vogue across Europe by the time we get to 1692, witch hunting as a tradition had existed for such a long period of time. It's kind of like in the cultural DNA, and many communities, whether they were Protestant or Catholic, especially in the Holy Roman Empire, England, and the Low Countries, had experienced waves of witch trials. And I think that our modern morality spectrum doesn't really apply the same way because of this time period, and witch hunting is almost like a form of sport. Maybe like, I don't know, what's a lesser sport? Like a pickleball league or something like that.
Way to upset all our pickleball players. No, and I get that.
No one plays pickleball, Jen, who listens to all of our listeners are below the age of 50.
Right, they play real sports, I know.
That's right.
No, and I get that, and totally, and we're gonna go a little bit more into the context about why this became so prevalent, but it's still just so frustrating. But then I started to think, and we'll get more into this again later, which apparently is a tagline of this episode, is that what they were doing back in 1692 and stuff we're doing today with modern social media, it's not that different.
Totally. That is 100% true
Yeah.
because the Salem witch trials are a moral panic. And we have been living in American society in particular, in my opinion anyway, in one long reoccurring moral panic since the 1980s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yeah, there's a lot of synergy between then and now. Totally.
So, what makes the Puritans, because this is the Salem witch trial happens predominantly in the Puritan community, what makes them different than
Okay.
other forms of Christianity that would lend itself to believing so heavily in witches?
Right. So, like we said before, regardless of denomination, witch acceptance had totally existed for hundreds of years at this point. The Puritans are part of a very niche type of religious tradition that formed after the Protestant Reformation called Calvinism. And Calvinists have two quirks here that really lend themselves well. First and foremost, they believe in this idea of the elect, these people who are chosen by God who are predestined to go to heaven.
Mhm.
And if you are one of the elect, you can't do bad things. You can't sin or transgress. So anybody who's like morally upright and upstanding, they're going to be viewed as part of the elect. So there's a kind of an affectation that takes hold within Calvinist communities. And the Puritans are some of the most extreme of all the Calvinists to be morally upright and sound, to always do the right thing. Anybody who's transgressive or outside of the norm then is seen as a sinner and will be punished by God. And that's the other part of the Calvinist tradition that we need to keep in mind, is that in the Calvinist tradition, God is a wrathful God, not a loving and caring God. He wants to punish sin and transgression. And that could happen to the individual's family, and or to the individual's community. So these Puritans, they're English Protestants who believe the devil was real and as active as God, and believed that the devil would tempt them to sin and then God would punish, or the devil would tempt them, and then if they could pass the test, they could see that they were part of the elect.
That predestination, it throws me. I'm like, come
Yeah,
on. But
totally.
okay, so that makes sense. So I definitely get with the Puritans and the devil being as active as God. And I know there are other things going on in New England at the time.
Mhm.
There were relations between Native Americans and the New England colonies were not good at all. I think initially they start off with trade, and it's relatively beneficial to both, but it doesn't stay that way. And I know the reason it doesn't stay that way is because for the people who moved to New England, these were predominantly families, right? And they
Yeah,
wanted agriculturally based society, self-sufficient, God's glory on a hill kind
yeah,
of
quite
element.
literally. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The whole city on a hill, that Winthrop sermon is this, yeah, exact time period and moment.
And the more that these people move to the New England colonies, the more land they need. And the only land that they can get comes from land that is already occupied by Native Americans who have lived there for how many hundreds or thousands of years, right? So even though initially all of this, the relations between trade was okay, the more that we get, more push we get into Native American lands, the more conflict there's going to be. And I know in New England, the conflict got really, really nasty with Metacom's war.
Yeah, out of control, really. I think one of those things that's kind of interesting is like per capita, this is the bloodiest war in American history, even though we're like at pre-American Revolution,
Mhm.
constitutional, whatever. I mean, just the number of people who die as a result of this war, it outpaces or outstrips per capita the number of deaths in any war the United States has ever fought in. It's
Isn't that crazy?
horrific. Yeah,
And
it's
it's
horrific.
we're not talking, and it's brutal death, like really, really bad. And for those who don't
You're
know,
avoiding it.
I'm
I
being
mean,
not, I don't want to say it creeps me
We're
out.
we're talking about people being flayed
Oh yeah,
alive,
yes, it's horrible.
burnings, both sides ratchet up the death and destruction, because they wanna send messages, so you have, like, hanging corpses in forests and decapitated heads on pikes, and then reprisals, and families are being killed, and body parts are being worn by natives to intimidate the colonists,
Yeah,
and then when yeah, it is out
yeah,
of control.
it's I mean, even though it only lasts for a year, the amount of psychological damage that it does, especially to the New England colonists, right? Because and I get it, like, the Wabanaki were upset because the English colonists wanted them to give up their guns and start abiding by British laws, and the Wabanaki understood, if we give up our guns, how are we gonna hunt? How are we gonna survive? With Metacom, he's like, "We can't do this anymore. We can't compromise. We've gotta take it to the English." So they take it to the English retaliate, and it's terrible. Like, and
Yeah.
then the English colonists start offering bounty on Native American heads, like, however many you can get us, you can make more money. Like, it's terrible.
Yeah, and, what's crazy about that is the colonists didn't even wanna follow English laws.
No,
What are
I
they
know,
talking
right?
about, the natives? Like, these guys all left because they were insufferable, and they didn't wanna live under anybody else's direction or tutelage. They wanted to follow God's laws, and so when the king gave them laws, they showed up, they didn't even have a charter.
I
And
know.
then they have a whole series of charters that they just cancel out all that. And then they're brutally decapitating people $5 per head. Like, this is insane. It's just insane. You wonder why this witch trial madness happens.
Well, yeah, because it's much easier to blame witches than recognize what humans are capable of, the brutality
Yeah,
we're capable of,
it's
right? And
horrible.
so this is much easier to say God is mad at us, and so therefore this is what's happening, instead of we're horrible individuals and we can't begin to live up to the religious perfection that we want to. I mean, it's just all around bad. So really the reason this is so important is because the psychological damage done by King Metacom's war, really Maine is kind of like left. They leave. Like
Yeah.
the colonists are like, we can't be here. It's not safe. We don't have the protection. So Maine kind of becomes pretty isolated. Those people move down. Those who do survive move down into like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, into Salem, and they bring that fear and that PTSD with them.
Yeah, totally. And that frontier PTSD, I love how you brought that up. That is definitely going to play a huge role in why this witch trial moral panic really explodes, is because you have so many people who, from a psychological standpoint, are suffering from like post-traumatic stress,
Mhm.
but then also it levels up, right? It's because of the Calvinist nature of punishment and God's wrath, and part of being the elect. So there's this strong social pressure to also not be transgressive and to stand in line. So any and every small conflict within the society is going to get magnified, because now it's like, am I going to be viewed as like outside of the norm? And then you add
Mhm.
on the other stress. It's just like this is a true cauldron of chaos
Yeah.
that is now bubbling.
Yeah. And again, you got to blame someone's. In
Hmm.
early, so this all begins in early 1692. And like you said, Betty Paris and Abigail William. And Betty Paris was, I believe, the niece of the reverend of the town
Hmm.
um, who was there. And all of a sudden they start exhibiting weird symptoms or alarming symptoms. Their bodies are contorting. They have bouts of screaming, out of nowhere. Their complaints of burning pain. And then a little bit later, young Ann Putnam suffers from the same symptoms. And these symptoms aren't necessarily unique. It's not like these are brand new and no one's ever seen them. When kids get sick, they get sick and they don't know how to express themselves, and this is how they go. So the first choice was to bring in, what they did is they brought in a local doctor, which was normal. Okay.
Hmm.
You bring in a doctor, tell us what's wrong so we can solve it. This guy's name was Dr. Griggs. And at the time, doctors did know of epilepsy and other common ailments that could cause these symptoms. They weren't completely ignorant. But
Right.
Griggs ruled all these out. He's like, nope, this is not epilepsy. It's not, whatever, any kind of other illness. And so he says, if it's not something I can diagnose, it therefore must be witchcraft.
That's right. Now, there's going to be some people who are listening before we go any further,
Yeah.
who are going to be like saying out loud in their car or on their walk or wherever, like, I know what this was. I've done some sleuthing of this on my own. This was ergot poisoning.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
what this is. However, it should be noted that the claims for the evidence for ergot poisoning here are it doesn't add up,
Right. Correct.
essentially, because a couple things. So for people who don't know what ergot poisoning is, it's a fungus that can grow on cereal grains, and these farmers are growing mainly barley and
Uh-huh.
wheat in their fields and then storing it for long periods of time, oftentimes in humid conditions in the summer, and then, wet and rainy conditions in the fall and snowy conditions in the winter, right? So there's a large opportunity for this stored
Uh-huh.
grain to get wet, and then for a fungus to set in and grow, and then that fungus can go out there and get you, if like Last of Us style or something like that, right? But
Nice.
yeah. However, this ergot poisoning, the symptoms of which are hallucinations. Like
Uh-huh.
ergot is a hallucinogenic LSD related chemical compound. It would have presented much more broadly across Salem Village. So
Yeah.
instead of having 3 or 4, eventually the number of people who can confess to witchcraft at some level climbs into the 20s or 30s. You would have seen mass ergot poisoning
Uh-huh.
all across the community. The other occurrence here that we should just note, and why poisoning is like sus as a likely cause, is because of the length of time of this panic, the witch trial hunt panic,
Uh-huh.
testimonies, all that sort of stuff. We're talking about something that lasts a year, a little
Yeah.
bit over a
Yeah.
year. The ergot poisoning effects, if they had lasted that long, people would have died. They would have succumbed to this fungal infection. at such a level. So there's no evidence that can prove that this particular outbreak of hysteria had anything to do with ergot poisoning. However, it is a fun internet point the finger at sort of fact and say,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that's the reason why this happened. I think there's something more sinister, but also just more logical at play here. But again, like you said, tagline of the episode, we'll get to that
Not
later.
later, right? So when Dr. Griggs says, "Nope, this has to be witchcraft," because witchcraft had been so prevalent not only in Europe, but it still even existed in the colonies, the idea of witches, it was grabbed upon. And when the young girls were questioned about what's going on, the first person that they turned against was this woman named Tituba, and she was the house servant in the Paris household where
She's a
Betty
slave.
Paris, yeah, lived.
Yeah.
And she was Black. She was
Mhm.
there's not a lot about her, but the general consensus is she probably came from the West Indies, and so definitely had more of the religious beliefs of the West Indies and traditional African religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs, and so probably the easiest target for the girls.
Well, 100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense that they would turn to her as well, because where are these main accusers, the afflicted is
Yeah.
what they are called. Where are they coming out of? They're coming out of the local preacher's household, and he's already in some hot water with the rest of the village because they don't like him over
Yeah.
this dispute over pay and firewood. And it's like a whole thing because Salem Village, shockingly, is not a fun place to live after all the things that we've described. It's also just full of, like, it seems like all the most annoying and awful people who live in Massachusetts, they all live together in this place, and they all just love hating on each other. And so, like, the most outsider of outsider person, Tituba, gets, like, kinda caught up in all this, and she also, like, had them, like, as part of the process of, like, the affliction and
Uh-huh.
the witch trials, there was, like, a cake that they had made,
Oh,
right?
yeah, the urine cake or something
The
like
urine
that, yeah.
cake, yeah, which, like, we don't need to get into the details of it. It just sounds like something that she did to put people on. Yeah, it just seems like, again, this is like a yes-anding sort of situation, and because she's an outcast, Tituba eventually becomes accused, but this sets up a pattern. And if we start getting into all the people who are accused and all the
Oh god,
people,
no.
it just becomes names after
Yeah.
names, and we lose the thread really easy. So, like, here's what we need to know. The afflicted are the main accusers, and the people who become accused oftentimes are poor. They didn't go to church. They live on the outside of town, either like literally sometimes or figuratively.
Mhm.
They don't abide by the social norms, so they're viewed as internal outsiders. And oftentimes, they're people who are not married or they're widowers
Yeah,
or
and it's women, like, it's the
yes.
easiest way to target women, and that's because of the Puritan belief that women were so much more easily seduced or easily to break down by demons and the devil, like, they were
That's right.
easier to possess, and so that's why it was predominantly women. It really what Salem Village is, it is a village full of Karens.
Yeah, it really is. Or like internet trolls, like people who today would be on various boards, um, you know, 15 years ago, maybe they were on like 4chan or something awful or something like that.
Yeah.
Now they're like out there, programming as bots or, hiding their power levels until just the right time. Or you know what they're probably doing if they're today?
Huh.
They're shelling some sort of crypto.
Yeah.
That's what they're
Well, it
doing.
is because, you know, accusations, we do it in today's society all the time. We just use social media to do it instead.
Yeah, totally. Which they're using their version of social
Yeah.
media, which is like the church and the meeting house
Yeah.
where these public trials start to take place, which was the local bar,
Yeah,
right?
I
So you
know,
go down
right?
to the
I know.
pub,
The meeting
you go
house
down to the
sounds
pub.
so professional, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then like you get like, the youngest kids in town
I know.
whose parents are like at odds with everybody else because they don't have enough firewood. And then they're just like saying like, you made me sick. And then they start like yes-anding each other and the girls start working in unison and they start accusing someone. And the next thing you know, that person's thrown in jail and they get jail fever and then die of diarrhea. Or eventually they don't confess and they
Yeah.
get hung, or they do confess and then they become part of the accusational process. And we just get into this pattern of accusers then becoming the next round of or accused, excuse me, becoming the next round of accusers, and on we go. It's totally deranged melting.
And it shouldn't have gone that way, and that's what blows me away the most is because there was precedent, not only
Ooh,
in England, but in the colonies about how to deal with witchcraft, and there was actually calmer heads prevailed at some point. There's this guy
say more. Tell us. What is this?
So
I don't know this.
So there's this guy named Reverend Richard Bernard, and in 1627 he published this book called I think it's called like the Guide to the Grand or Grand Jurymen.
Okay.
And it was this book that said, look, yes, witches exist. Totally true. But when charges of witchcraft are thrown about, people needed to be really, really cautious before taking this to trial because he says, number one, certain illnesses can mimic demonic tortures. Okay. So you got it before anything else, you get a skilled physician. Now I know that the Paris has got Dr. Griggs. I don't know how skilled he was. He was more like that rural version of a doctor, and whether or not he was as truly skilled as he should have been, I don't know. But even if you do get a physician that comes in and says, "Nope, this is witchcraft," it still may not be witchcraft. It actually could be devil possession. And this throws a little bit differently because in devil possession, as long as you had prayer and people prayed for you, you get the devil out of you and people weren't nearly as angry about it. But then he also says, don't assume automatic guilt. Many grounds for suspicion could have innocent explanations as well. So this guy in 1627 is saying, hey, if you're leveling a witchcraft accusation, there is a process you need to go through before anybody first goes to trial. And then even if they do go to trial, that before execution. So he's like, certain illnesses, get a doctor first. If the doctor says can't figure it out, can't automatically assume guilt. Right? You got to see if there's innocent explanations as well. And even if there's no innocent explanations, when this happens, if you get to the part of questioning, everybody should be questioned separately. The afflicted, the individual witnesses, the suspects, everybody should be interviewed and questioned apart from each other. And then he also
Interesting.
lays the big one at the thing. You cannot rely on spectral evidence.
Ooh. All right. Yeah, we'll get it. I know. Again, we'll get into that more later.
So
What I
this
what I
guy
like
lays
about this
it
real
out.
quick though, yeah, is this builds on a text that came out of the witch hunting tradition in like the Germanic regions.
Mhm.
But it's like a more level-headed version of it because there was this other book that had been used by witch hunters for centuries before this. It's called the Malleus Maleficarum or Maleficorum,
Mhm.
which translates from Latin to Hammer of Witches. It was written by this German Catholic clergyman named Heinrich Kramer, which is like an extremely misogynistic text
Oh,
that
lovely.
is supposed to, yeah, it's the sort of stuff that like, I bet like even Andrew Tate would be like, let's take this down a couple levels. But
Frightening.
it's like it, it lays out the idea of like looking for devil's marks and familiars and a way of identifying women in particular. And like you said, many of the accused oftentimes are women on the outside looking in. But it was also like super extreme. And so it seems to be the case that this Reverend Richard Bernard was like, look, we were a little bit off base with the
Yeah.
Malleus Maleficarum. Let's kind of try to recover some reason here. Yes, witches are real. We just got to go about proving it the right way.
Right. And that his process had been used in other places in the colonies. And many times accusations of witchcraft were leveled and they were never followed through with because they're like, you use spectral evidence, that doesn't work. But in New England, in Salem Village, when
Mhm.
all this hits the fan, it's like they looked at the book and said, we're going to do everything opposite.
It's because Bernard didn't control for how bored people were in Salem. He didn't control for how petty the grievances were, yet all consuming they could become.
Yeah.
And so it goes from a like, I don't have enough firewood, or like what became like super common over the course of all of this, like, well, my cow died. Like, did a witch kill your cow? And like, well, one of the people who's accused of being a witch did get in an argument with me 3 years
I know.
prior to the cow dying, or the fence fell down 2 months before I had some interaction with an accused witch. And you know what? I bet you the witch killed the cow or the witch killed the fence or whatever. And now they're just like, yeah, time to kill that witch because the pigs are dead. The cow's dead. The fence fell down. My foot hurts. My mustache looks weird this morning or whatever BS is going on here.
So this idea of using witchcraft as a way to get rid of your opposition.
Yeah, totally.
Lovely.
And it also kind of makes sense. We didn't get into it, nor do I think we will really much for the pod, but like it should also just be noted that the idea of magic was something that was real in people's lives. There's
Yeah.
like black magic and white magic, and lots of people practice white magic to get God's fortune or to conjure good things in their life as well. So this idea of like these, supernatural was not
Mhm.
unfamiliar to people. So another thing to kind of throw into this witch's brew that we are
Nice.
concocting here is this idea that like magic is familiar to people.
Yeah, it is.
All right. So,
So when this happens and the accusations increase, we do have basically magistrates coming in from the outside, and their job is to question those who are accused and see, is there truly any basis for witchcraft?
right.
Only what they decide to do is when they get into town, whether it's because of pressure from the community members or wanting to get this done quickly, who knows? They just start interviewing everybody together. The accused, the accusers,
Smart.
all of the community in the meeting house together and let the questions fly. And so Tituba is one of the first to be obviously interrogated, though we're pretty sure that she was interrogated and beaten by Reverend Paris before all of this started. So she comes up and says, "Yep, I made a deal with the devil."
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's big.
Yeah. And obviously this is coerced from the I made a deal with the devil. I signed my name in the book that was presented to her by a dark man from Boston. And then she says, I've seen other names. And of course, the other names are the other accused by Paris and Williams. So Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, both of which were outcasts in Salem Village. So now here we go. Get that ball rolling with all these accusations.
And once these types of accusations and behaviors are allowed to come in, like once people are hearing from each other and yes-anding and all that sort of stuff, it led to more accusations against more community members. And eventually this would spread all through Salem Village to the surrounding nearby areas. And this pattern of accusations and stuff starts to settle in, like we've already said. So basically,
Yep.
here's what happens. More girls and more young women begin exhibiting similar symptoms. People like Marcy Lewis and Mary Walcott. These accusers, these afflicted, would cry out specific names during various fits, oftentimes during these meeting house times, oftentimes also after they had also been accused of witchcraft. So
Yep.
there's this kind of building going on. These afflicted begin to claim that they have seen some sort of accused person. But, and now we're starting to go against that Reverend Bernard's playbook.
Mhm.
They start to say that they're seeing these specters tormenting them, somebody on an ethereal plane,
I
maybe
know.
at night at the foot of their bed or something. So it's like came to you in a dream or whatever, right? And then finally, there's this touch test that was given to a lot of these women as well. If an accused person touched the afflicted, the person in the symptoms would stop,
Which
right?
is
So yeah, that's not a thing.
well, and
That's
it's
not
just
a
so ridiculous. Like, I'm like, "Of course it's gonna stop." They're like,
yeah, they touched them and
"Yeah,
you're in control of this. So like, if for example, like if I'm acting all crazy and I'm like, Jen totally bewitched me, and
yeah,
then like you came over and touched my shoulder and I stopped accusing you, people will be like, Jen's a witch.
yeah."
Like I just accused you of being a witch. Of course, I have every reason to stop. Anyway, sorry.
I know.
It's the whole thing. It's just
And this is not like Cletus the slack-jawed yokel. These are educated people in this society
mhm.
who are just perpetuating, and it goes on and on and on, and it just accusation begets accusation, and nobody is stepping in as the voice of reason and saying, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't listen to 11 and 9-year-old girls who are accusing people of witchcraft."
Yeah, but here's what's happening. All right,
Alright.
so now we got to let the listener in on some of the stuff that we
Alright.
say we would get to later. So after someone is accused, they have one of two options, right?
Mhm.
Option number one is to say, like, I'm not guilty. This is like, that didn't happen. I'm not confessing. People who went that route almost universally were hanged
Yes.
or killed
Yep.
or died in prison because they were there forever. The other thing that they could do is they could say, yep, I'm a witch. And then they can join the afflicted chorus and they can go about that whole process that we just laid out,
Okay.
right? The hard part with being like on the I didn't do anything wrong pathway was this introduction of spectral evidence, which
Mhm.
refers to a person's specter or their spirit,
Mhm.
which could appear, like I said before, in a dream or during the day or whatever. And many of the afflicted started saying, like, yeah, I knew about that specter because that I saw that in something else. Or like you said, I saw that in the devil's book. Or so they're just like playing off of each other. And because this is being accepted as like 50% of the evidence. And
Mhm.
then like if you act out or your cow's dead or whatever other stuff we said, like that's it, you're sunk. It was really, really hard to go the I'm innocent route, even though I think we can both agree 100% of these people are innocent of anything because they're outsiders or insufferable sort of people. They're more likely to, get accused and then now we're off and running. And speaking of these outsiders or these people, there was also a monetary gain. So
Oh,
somebody who
yeah.
already doesn't have family or doesn't have anybody who could collect their possessions, if they were killed, then their items could be sold or given as recompense to the afflicted who made the initial accusation. So there's a reason, a monetary material reason for people to be accusing each other, especially at this point in time when the bar for evidence has been lowered so low
Mhm.
that all it takes is a 9-year-old saying she's a witch, and that's about it.
Yep.
Yeah, so,
Could you
I mean, there's a
imagine
lot going on here.
if our could you imagine if students, that's all they had to do to
Don't
get
give them
teachers
ideas. Nope, don't give them any ideas. Luckily, we have due process.
this
Luckily, we have things in place, right? So these outsider magistrates, John Hawthorne and John
Yeah.
Corwin, they start lowering the bar, and eventually there's this thing called the Court of Oye and Termine, which is formed, which is like a witch trial thing, which, like, by the way, you were talking about before with the Native Americans being killed during Metacom's war,
Yeah.
completely illegal. This totally flies in the face
Oh,
of
yeah.
English law. So, like, we're just doing make-em-ups now. The governor says no court of Oye and Termine, and the court's like, is the governor a witch? Like, this thing is
I know.
spiraling out of control.
It
And
is.
at the center of this chaos emerges a particular person, one of those PTSD-ridden Maine refugees by the name of Abigail Hobbs,
Mhm.
who is like the cheap 17th century version of an internet troll that we could find in all of our research.
Oh, yeah.
She pumps up these accusations to the highest level possible. And more often than not, she is accusing some of the nicest, most like well-respected and loved members of Salem Village, who then obviously say, like, I am not a witch. And people come forward and they're like, I don't know. That those people, Goody Proctor is a good person. I don't know about this whole sort of thing. And
Mhm.
Hobbs gets everybody else on board, and then people like this start dying. And it's like the entire thing just starts to spiral out of control.
Yeah, and they can't, and it takes a year before anyone's willing to step in and say enough's enough, and that's because one of the governors of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, his wife gets accused, and then he's like, "Nope, that's it, we're done.
Yeah,
We're
it's
done."
that and the court of Oye and Termine, those judges also find themselves accused by the afflicted as
Yeah.
well. And then, like, for the first time ever, you have like reasonable heads prevailing. And then you also had in this like kind of cool, like murked out version of 17th century justice. Some of the accused near the end also had family members. Like there was one woman whose husband was a war veteran. And when his wife gets thrown in jail, he just like rounds up all the guys who went out there and fought in Metacom's war.
Yeah.
And they like run a raid on the prison and
Yeah,
they break everybody out in like this big shootout and they like blow up the prison and a bunch of people escape. There was clearly a limit that was reached,
Yeah.
right? And at that point in time, the witch trials end really abruptly. Like all of a
yeah,
sudden everybody's like, "Oh yeah, the devil's gone. He
yeah,
peaced out. He had other things to work on. He was doing a project in a different part of the world. And he had to leave forever.
yeah, I
Like
mean,
it's
that's
just over."
literally what and you know what's really funny is going through all this research, very few documents exist anymore about what happened to the accusers. It's kind of like they're like, "Oh god, we're so embarrassed, burn the documents."
Yeah. The one thing that we know for certain though, dear listener, is that none of the accusers, none of the people who confessed to witchcraft were executed or hung or had any sort of consequence for their actions. The only people who died, whether they be through execution or in the case of one man, his name was Giles Corey, which like we have talked a lot about the unfortunate nature of many of the people who died. Giles Corey, I'm not rooting for anybody to have been executed in this, but like he definitely like killed a servant at one point in his life. Like he
Yeah,
openly like basically just said it. He was a known thief
yeah,
and actual destructor. It's like close to the type of person that the afflicted were accusing could exist. It
yeah,
was Giles Corey, who also was just like, well, I'm guilty of a lot of stuff, but not of being a witch. So I'm not
right.
copping to that one. And there, eventually he was executed, but he was executed in his own unique way. He did not want to be hanged. So he asked to be pressed. Do you know what that is?
Isn't that like they stick a big rock on you and squish you?
Well, sort of, yeah. So it's like they put like these like metal clawed sort of like pyramids on the ground, and then you lay on those, and then they put a series of sews on you until, like, your chest and body collapses, and you're pushed
Oh,
into these pyramids, and then they, like, kinda do you in. So it's, like, this extra graphic and awful sort of way of killing someone. Giles Corey is the only person who's pressed, and my theory on that, by the way, is that one got too real. Like,
yeah.
that
Oh,
one
and they're
got a
like,
li yeah. They're like, "Hey, we'll do the hangings," which, like, these aren't, like, awesome hangings. Like,
no.
I'm sorry, let me check.
Yeah, no,
Don't
hanging
clip
is
that,
awesome,
don't
by the
clip that.
way.
Yeah, exactly, don't clip that, there's no awesome hangings. But what I'm saying is, like, where they do, like, the drop door and it breaks your
Yeah.
neck and the person dies very quickly. These are, like, strangulation hangings, and so people are dying over the period of, like, 10 or 15 minutes
Ugh.
sometimes, before they finally lose oxygenation to the brain and the body dies and the brain dies. So these are, like, prolonged. So these are, the manner of execution is still not great. However, the Corey's pressing is
Ugh,
is
it's nasty.
probably was just a little too much. Yeah. And I think that kind of gets into like what we see in modern times too. Is like once you start seeing the consequences of your actions, like it's really fun in the internet space for people to fantasize about whatever they want and
Mhm.
to bring up whatever sort of crazy ideas that they might have. I think this was really common with like QAnon, for example. We see this now with like AI generated content all over the place. Like
Oh,
people
yeah.
are like quote unquote having fun with it. And then every now and then there are consequences to the generation of content that eventually the content makes its way offline.
Mhm.
And then in real life, there are like actual true consequences. And then people look at that, whatever occurred, and they're like, oof,
Too far.
yeah, too far. We don't like this.
Well,
And
and
I
it's
think that's what kind of happens here.
It's true because I think in modern society, like, oh, we're too smart. We could never do something like this, but we're doing it on an everyday basis. Anything on social media, anything online, false accusations are flying every day. We get mass hysteria because of it every day. Because what we end up doing as a whole society is anything that threatens us, anything that creates fear in us, anything that's outside the norm. Okay, or outside our norm, our individual norm, okay, we see as odd and not okay. And then we end up joining these echo chambers on social media where we get into the same kind of vibe with people who think just like us or whatever it may be, and it leads to this mob mentality and score settling.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And oftentimes the recipients of whatever the moral panic might be are outsiders, maybe they're immigrants.
Mhm.
And to be clear, in the Massachusetts colony, there was outsider immigrant panic
Mhm.
during the late 1600s, specifically people who were coming to join the colony who were not Puritans. They're not Calvinists. And the colony is welcoming these people in as members of what was like called the half covenant,
Mhm.
which is like you could be part of the Puritan church, so you can keep the church numbers up, but you haven't had the transformative religious experience that all Puritans need to have to be part of the congregation and therefore have full rights
Mhm.
within the community. But many people who were part of the half covenant still had like voting rights.
Yeah.
And so like there was this like kind of feeling that like society is getting washed a little bit and what we used to be isn't the same. And as a result, we need to find people to blame this on. And that kind of sounds really familiar to internet panics and immigrant panics that we
Mhm.
see the world over here in this century
Yeah.
and the last one.
Yeah, like it's yeah, true.
So this
1693,
ends.
yeah, it ends. It like you said, like, it's literally like flipping a switch, and so the last accused witch finally walks free from Salem jail in May of 1693, but seriously, the scars are there, and it's never, ever gonna recover. Like, it really won't recover from this.
Puritanism won't recover from
No,
that.
that this'll be it for it because it's the extremism that it goes to. So, 20 innocent people lose their lives, families were torn apart, entire town has to reckon with how are you gonna come back from this?
Yeah, and
What
you
do you
don't.
you can't. You can't possibly rebuild a community out of the
No.
embers of these witch trials,
And
and
it's not just Salem, right?
no,
Like,
right.
one of the things that happens pretty shortly after all of this chaos is a new charter is issued, and the English government comes in and takes a lot more control over what's going on in the Massachusetts colony
Yeah,
because
they go crazy.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's that simple, and it's not supernatural, and we know that. It's just the human ability to let fear override reason and to choose belonging over truth.
yeah,
That's what this all comes down to.
yeah. Which, like, you wanna bookend this thing? Do you know what the man in the hat and sleep paralysis is? Do you know what's going on there?
Mm-mm.
It's when you wake up from REM sleep too suddenly and your body doesn't have like like control over the nervous system and
Yeah.
muscle system. And so the inability to move is not because you're being paralyzed by some sort of specter.
Mhm.
It's that your body is waking up slower than your mind. So those handful of seconds where you can't move or do anything during sleep paralysis
Yeah.
is just a natural result of coming out of REM cycle sleep too quickly. And what you're seeing on the outside, this like shape and form, is just the mind's like projection of dreams
Mhm.
into an intermittent space. And then more often than not, what the human body does is it anthropomorphizes what you're seeing. And so what you're
Crazy.
probably seeing is just nothing. It's just like shadows
Yeah.
of chemicals, like a visual purple or something on the inside of your eyes.
Yeah.
But then we make it out to be a person, the shape of nothing, right? And I think that's kind of what happened here for 1 year
Yeah.
in Salem Village is people just squinted and believed what they wanted to
It's
see.
true. It's crazy. Well, I think that's gonna end it for tonight.
Yep,
Yeah, our first one back after a year. So
feels
thanks.
good.
It does. It really does. So, thanks for joining us on this journey through, unfortunately, one of America's darkest chapters. Wish it was the last dark chapter, but that's not the case.
No.
Next week, what are we diving into, Matt?
So we've got a kind of loosely knit three-parter coming up,
Yeah.
taking a look at some pretty outrageous, because it's our podcast, events in the 60s and 70s that kick off in the United States. Then we're going to hop into Italy, and then we're going to finish things out in Chile. So I'm really looking forward to that one. So our next time we get through, we're going to be talking some 1960s American history. So I think
Nice.
everybody out there is going to be excited for that.
We're all over the board this season. It's gonna be awesome.
Got to.
I know, right? All right. Well, until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme a lot. I'm Jen with my co host Matt, and this has been Storytime with the Historists. Stay curious.
Bye.